Welcome to the Hearth of Hymonia. We're here today after kind of an unexpected break where I couldn't record audio for over a month, and it took a long time to figure out what the issue was. But it's been resolved, and we're here once again. Now that it's fall, and by the time you see this, it will certainly be October, with Halloween right around the corner somehow already, it feels appropriate to bring you a new series on a very special witch from ancient Greek and Roman literature. You may have heard of Medea. And so for the next couple of weeks, we're going to be talking about Medea's story. During my long and unexpected break, I had a lot of extra time to think about how I was going to present this story to you and this series. And I think the best way to do it is to have more of a casual conversation about some of the critical elements in the Medea myth. So we're going to start today with the most fundamental piece of this story, the most quintessential moment of magical output that drives the rest of the story. And that is the curse, and it is a curse that is put on Medea, which renders her infatuated with Jason. And as we'll see, this drives the plot of the rest of the story. But before we get into that, I am going to do a little bit of introduction to the sources that we have for this story. So that'll be the first part of this video, and then we'll talk about the curse itself. And in the next few videos, we'll continue to address the magic and the supernatural things that come up in this story as we get closer and closer to Halloween. So without further ado, let's start talking about Medea. Medea's story is couched inside the story of Jason and the Argonauts. If you've never heard of that myth, essentially Jason is a Greek hero who sails with a crew on what is supposedly the first ship ever built, the Argo. And they leave Greece and travel all the way to Colchis, which is in modern-day Georgia, as in the country Georgia, not the state Georgia, where they meet Medea, who ultimately ends up helping them retrieve what they're looking for, the golden fleece. This is a magical object, the fleece of a golden ram. And Jason and his crew are tasked with bringing it back to Greece where it originated from, and Medea helps them along the way. So when we talk about Medea, we're really talking about a character in this larger story. The story isn't presented chronologically in the different sources. Different sources treat different parts of the story, but if we put it all together, it looks something like this. In a place called Iolcus, which is in Thessaly, a part of Greece, two children, Phrixus and Helle, came into conflict with their stepmother. This is a classic evil stepmother story, and they needed to escape. With the help of the gods, they were given a ram whose fleece was made of gold, and they got on its back and fled from Greece towards Colchis. Phrixus made it to Colchis, but Helle unfortunately died along the way. Meanwhile, back in Iolcus, there is political turmoil brewing between two brothers. Again, a classic case of the rightful king and his usurping evil brother, or cousin, depending on who you read, named Pelias. So Pelias has taken over the throne and has expelled the rightful king Aeson, whose son is Jason. Jason is raised outside of Iolcus to keep him out of trouble and out of danger, and he's educated by the centaur Chiron, who is the educator of heroes. He's also the teacher of Achilles. When Jason's old enough, he comes back to Iolcus to claim the rightful throne once again for his father. And Pelias wants to avoid any sort of trouble with Jason because there was a prophecy that said that Jason would come back and overthrow him. So he says, I will give you the throne peacefully if you do something for me in exchange. And what Pelias asks him to do is to travel to Colchis and retrieve the golden fleece. Bring it back to Iolcus, where it rightfully belongs, as a treasure, as a religious object, as something that belonged to Jason's ancestors, Phrixus and Helle. And if Jason is able to do this, then Pelias will give up the throne without a fight. Now, of course, Pelias fully anticipates that Jason will not be able to complete this quest. And so he sends Jason off with the hope that this will be the end of him. So Jason assembles his crew of famous Argonauts, and there are famous characters from mythology on this trip. Now, this takes place in the early days of Heroes, prior to the Trojan War. So you have Peleus, the father of Achilles, along with other fathers of heroes who will, in the next generation, fight in the Trojan War. You also have demigods and characters that are sometimes gods in different stories. Heracles is an Argonaut, and in fact, in some versions, he's the leader of the Argonauts. You have the Dioscoroi, Castor and Polydeuces, or his Roman name, Pollux. Orpheus is also an Argonaut, and so there's a lot of really famous characters that join this crew. The ship Argo is built by someone named Argus with the help of Athena, the goddess of crafts, and the Argonauts go on their way. Now, because this is an adventure story, it gives the authors of this myth a lot of freedom to be able to write little side quests into the journey. So a lot of the sources tell stories within stories about places that the Argonauts visited, monsters that they fought, heroes that they encountered, all sorts of different things. And so by the time the Argonauts reach Colchis, they have been out adventuring for some time. When they get to Colchis, their plan is to explain to the king there, a guy named Aeetes, Medea's father, that the golden fleece actually rightfully belongs with them, and if he would just give it back to them, they will be on their merry way. They don't want to cause any trouble, but of course, Aeetes does not go for this plan. He's very hostile to the idea that these pirates, as he calls them in some sources, would come to his shores and try to steal a religious and magical object from him with this story about how it rightfully belongs to them, even though Phrixus, who originally brought it to Colchis, ended up settling down, marrying one of Aeetes' daughters named Chalciope, and he even had children with Chalciope. So his descendants and Aeetes' descendants are one in the same. So he has just as much right to hold on to the golden fleece as Jason does to take it. And in fact, he is so incensed at the idea that these pirates would come to steal from him that he challenges Jason to 3 impossible tasks. He says, you can have the fleece, but you need to do 3 things for me. First, you need to plow a field using bulls who breathe fire. Next, you need to fight a race of men that's born from the teeth of dragons. And lastly, you need to steal the fleece from the serpent, who never sleeps and watches over the fleece in the grove of Ares. Now, there's no way that Jason, who is a mortal person, would be able to complete these tasks. So he's not really sure what it is that he's supposed to do here. And that's when Medea comes in. Medea, for reasons we'll talk about in this video, has decided that she's going to help Jason complete the tasks, get around her father, steal the fleece, and go off to Greece, in exchange for taking her with them. And that's what happens. Medea is a witch, and she uses her magic to help Jason complete these tasks. Jason takes her with him, and they escape. On their way back from Colchis to Greece, they make several stops. Medea performs magic, and Medea also, for reasons again that we'll get to in this video, starts committing murders. The first of which is her own brother, who in some sources is a youth of fighting age, maybe late teens, early 20s, but in other sources is a child as young as 12. So once Medea is with Jason, her role in the story kind of changes. They come back to Iolcus, Jason's hometown, and Medea, through deceit, trickery, and magic, convinces Pelias's daughters to murder him. So she effectively, though indirectly, murders the king there. And even though he was a usurper, this still gets her and Jason driven out of the city, and they land in Corinth. And Jason decides that it is in his best interest and the interest of the 2 children that he had with Medea, in most sources it's 2, but, that he should make a political alliance with the king. And the way this was done is through marriage. So Jason's marriage to Medea is illegitimate, and instead, Jason is betrothed to the daughter of the king. Medea is not happy about this, and so she ends up murdering Jason's new bride, and also her father, so another king is killed by Medea. And Medea at this point is driven so mad, in fact, that she will stop at nothing to hurt Jason at all costs, including killing those who are most precious to him in his life, their children. We don't hear from Jason anymore after that. Medea escapes the scene on a chariot pulled by dragons. It's kind of a long story. And some say she went to Athens. But this effectively is the end of the myth. Now, I had originally planned to go through each of the sources in detail in kind of like a standalone video that was going to be probably a couple of hours long. But since we've lost so much time, I'm not going to do that. What I've done is I've made a little guide to the sources, and it's on my website. I've linked it in the description down below, so you can go and take a look at that if you want to see the timeline of sources in chronological order from when they were written. The most famous of these sources are the 2 Argonauticai. There are, in fact, 3 Argonauticai, but 2 of them are the most famous. One written during the Hellenistic period by Apollonius of Rhodes. He's writing in Alexandria, Egypt, at the time when the library was really active and scholarship and literature of all kinds was being produced there. So his story is written in Greek. And the other Argonautica is that of Valerius Flaccus, a Roman writer writing in Latin during the Flavian period. So this is when the Roman Empire has already become quite established. And Valerius Flaccus's Argonautica follows that of Apollonius quite closely, but it does expand on it. Apollonius writes 4 books, and Valerius Flaccus writes 8. Both are unfinished or seemingly unfinished. And Valerius Flaccus's story reflects the more dark and spooky, for lack of a better word, tastes of the kind of middle empire, if you can call it that. It's still really the early empire. There's lots more magic, lots more dark themes, which we'll get into a little bit throughout this series. Both of these stories are epics, so they're quite long, full-length novels, essentially, and they follow Jason primarily, but feature Medea very heavily. The other famous sources for this myth are the Medea tragedies. These are plays written about Medea, and they're named after her, and they tell the story of what happens in Corinth when Medea is abandoned by Jason for another woman, and she ends up killing that other woman, the woman's father, and her own children in an attempt to hurt Jason. The original Medea play that we have is written by Euripides in the 5th century in Athens at the height of classical Athenian tragedy. And later we have a version of this same play produced by Seneca in Latin during the Julio-Claudian dynasty, that is the beginning part of the empire, specifically we think during the reign of Claudius. And again, it follows the Greek source very closely, apart from drumming up the drama and the darkness of it all. So these are the primary sources that we'll use throughout this series, but again, there are so many more sources that I wish we had time to talk about, and maybe someday we will be able to produce that video. But for now, like I said, I have a guide on my website, so go ahead and check that out if you want to learn more. I want to turn now to the critical moment in the story which changes the course of the story, both for Jason and also for Medea. So as I said, when we first meet Medea chronologically in the story, she is a young woman, a princess living in Colchis, and these Greek strangers have arrived on her doorstep, and she has been thrust into the middle of this conflict between Jason and her father. In the background of Jason's trip from Greece to Colchis, he has been safeguarded by the goddesses Hera and Athena. These goddesses have a vested interest in Jason's success, particularly because Hera wants to get revenge on Pelias. She doesn't like Pelias, she wants to get revenge on him, and so she decides that she's going to help out Jason to bring the fleece back, and as she plots and plans to also bring Medea back, who will eventually murder Pelias. In order to get Medea to betray her entire, not only family, not only her father, but her country as well, something needs to be done. This is not something that Medea is going to do naturally. So the goddesses conspire together, Hera and Athena, and they decide that they're going to bring in Aphrodite. The reason they want Aphrodite involved is because she and her son Eros, that is Cupid, will be able to make Medea fall in love with Jason. And I'm using that phrase, but really what it is it's an artificial infatuation with Jason to make it impossible for her to do anything apart from help him. Because if she doesn't help him, he, of course, is going to die as he's trying to sow the field with fire-breathing bulls and escape from a giant serpent who never sleeps and do all these things. The way this happens in the Argonautica, written by Apollonius of Rhodes, is we see Hera and Athena in conversation with Aphrodite, begging her to help, and Aphrodite telling Eros, who is presented as a child, to go and shoot Medea with an arrow. You've seen the Hallmark greeting cards, you know, these little winged cupids with their bow and arrow, and they make you fall in love, and it's so cute. But in fact, love magic in an ancient Greek and Roman context is in fact horrible. It is, as I said, an artificial infatuation with a person. It doesn't induce what we would call real love or true love between two people. We see it in a literary context and in a real-world context where people are writing curse tablets to try and get people to fall in love, fall out of love, etc., all of the different ways that that can be construed. And a common theme throughout all of it is violence. Curse tablets designed to make someone fall in love or to become passionate or infatuated with somebody describe intolerable physical pain coming upon the intended target until they act on what is this artificially implanted desire in them. I don't have an example with me. I should have gotten one, but maybe I'll put one up on the screen, but they all kind of say the same thing, which is, may so-and-so burn with a fire that means that they can't sleep at night and they can't do anything without suffering physical pain until they come to me and sleep with me, or whatever the intended effect is. On the literary side of things, we see some witches or witchcraft adjacent figures using magic in this kind of way, and again, it's marked by violence. The example that comes to mind is the witch that Horace writes about, sort of like late Roman Republic into the very beginning of the empire under Augustus. He writes about a witch named Canidia who is trying to get a lover back to her who has wandered away. And she does so in such desperation that she engages in human sacrifice. So just to give you a little bit of an idea of what this kind of thing is supposed to do. So when Eros comes to shoot Medea with the arrow, Apollonius of Rhodes describes how it affects Medea, and I'll read you that little section. By the way, all of the sources, including the ones that I'm not even really talking about today, I'm just going to have them in the description as well. You can read them in English online. So this comes from book 3 of the Argonautica by Apollonius of Rhodes. This is kind of the Medea book. 3 and 4 are the Medea books. And he says, "Meantime, Eros passed unseen through the grey mist, causing confusion, as when against grazing heifers rises the gadfly, which oxherds call the breese. And quickly beneath the lintel in the porch he strung his bow and took from the quiver an arrow unshot before, messenger of pain. And with swift feet unmarked he passed the threshold and keenly glanced around. And gliding close by Aeson's son, that is Jason, he laid the arrow notch on the cord in the center, and drawing wide apart with both hands, he shot at Medea. And speechless amazement seized her soul. But the god himself flashed back again from the high-roofed hall, laughing loud, and the bolt burnt deep down in the maiden's heart like a flame. And ever she kept darting bright glances straight up at Aeson's son, and within her breast her heart panted fast through anguish. All remembrance left her, and her soul melted with the sweet pain. And as a poor woman heaps dry twigs round a blazing brand, a daughter of toil whose task is the spinning of wool, that she may kindle a blaze at night beneath her roof when she has waked very early. And the flame waxing wondrous great from the small brand consumes all the twigs together. So, coiling round her heart, burnt secretly Love the Destroyer, and the hue of her soft cheeks went and came, now pale, now red, in her soul's distraction." Later on in the story, we see Medea fighting with herself about what to do. How could it be that she could betray her country, her family, her father, abandon her parents, eventually, as we will come to find out, murder her own brother and many others, all for this stranger who she's never even spoken to? At one point, she even resolves to take her own life rather than choose between this man who she now adores, apparently, and her own family. In the end, of course, Eros's curse wins out, and she does in fact help Jason. And in doing so, she repeats again later throughout Euripides' play and many of the other sources how she has no country. She's abandoned everything she ever knew, and she's stuck with this man who doesn't even appear to care about her at all. So I just want to emphasize how dark this is. This is not a love spell. This is not an innocent kind of, oh, I'll just make someone fall in love with someone else. No, this is violent and cruel. It takes away Medea's, it says it takes all remembrance from her. It makes her forget about her family. In one of the early sources, a Pythian ode written by Pindar in like the 6th century BCE in Greek, he describes Medea in similar terms, and he says that Aphrodite taught the son of Aeson skill in prayerful incantations so that he could rob Medea of reverence for her parents and a longing for Greece would lash her, her mind on fire with the whip of persuasion. In Valerius Flaccus's Argonautica, Medea actually suspects that she might be the victim of some kind of foul play. Juno has come to her in disguise as her sister Chalciope, and she has with her the girdle of Aphrodite, which is another magical object which has the kind of the same effect as Eros's arrow. But Medea suspects that it's really not Chalciope because she starts to feel these symptoms. But she's really no match for it. Even though she's a powerful witch and she becomes more powerful as the story goes on, she is no match for the gods. And the gods do, in fact, win out. And she has no choice in the matter but to carry on with the plan that they have for her. I want to go back to Pindar for just a minute because the way that Medea is cursed is a little bit different in his poem. It's a much shorter poem, so we only get 1 or 2 sentences, but this is what he says. And the queen of sharpest arrows brought the dappled wryneck from Olympus, bound to the 4 spokes of the indissoluble wheel. Aphrodite of Cyprus brought the maddening bird to men for the first time. And she taught the son of Aeson skill in prayerful incantations, so that he could rob Medea of reverence for her parents, and a longing for Greece would lash her, her mind on fire with the whip of persuasion. Pindar is describing a magical object called the yunx, and even though we don't have a ton of examples of it and we're not entirely sure how it was supposed to work, we do have several examples of it from the archaeological records, so you can see on the screen here what I'm talking about. And the yunx is this object that is used in magical ritual to make someone fall in love. We see it in Ovid's Amores. I just did a video on that over the summer if you saw that. And Pindar places it here in the Medea story. And he says specifically that Aphrodite taught Jason how to use this object along with what he calls prayerful incantations, which is either just really persuasive speech or it could in fact be magical spells that Jason himself is using to curse Medea with this love. So Pindar gives us the yunx, Valerius Flaccus gives us the girdle of Aphrodite, and Apollonius of Rhodes gives us Eros with his poison arrows. But regardless of how Medea is made to fall into infatuation with Jason, she plays no role in it, and in fact, Jason plays very little role in it. She in particular, and all of the human actors in this story, are subject to the whims of the gods. They are powerless pawns in the gods' games, essentially. And Medea suffers real, serious, intense consequences as a result of this. So I wanted to start with this curse on Medea because everything that happens after this is a result of this curse. Medea helps Jason with the tasks that her father has given him. Jason takes her back with him to Greece. She commits a whole bunch of murders, and in the end, her murderous streak ends with her own children. So this curse that is placed upon her takes everything away from her. As her condition deteriorates, we see this in particular in Euripides and Seneca, as her condition deteriorates, this madness that continues to affect her, even after Jason has abandoned her, even after she's no longer quote-unquote in love with Jason, she's still driven mad by Jason and the things that he's doing. She ends up destroying her own family and her own self. I mean, she doesn't die at the end of the play, but in fact, life after murdering your own children, I would imagine just has to be worse. So, as we go through this series, we'll talk about some of the more fun aspects, the magic, the rituals. There's a little bit of necromancy that happens. We'll get into prophecy. We'll do all sorts of fun things, but I just want to stress at the very start that this is a dark story. This is a miserable, wretched story of a woman who loses everything through essentially no fault of her own, and her own actions later in the story, as a result of this curse, destroy everything she has ever loved or cared for. So on that cheerful note, I'm going to end this video. I'm not sure what direction we're going to go next time because I'm just kind of taking these videos as they come, but it will be something magic and supernatural related in the Medea story. Again, if you want to see the full list of sources and read any of them, check out the description and the full guide that is on my website. And otherwise, I will see you back here next time as we continue to discuss this rich and deep and dark and spooky myth. So that's all, and thank you for watching. I will see you next time.